Patch 12.17 is upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, and some other changes too. Starting with nerfs, we have a small change to Ahri with her charm's duration being shorter at early levels. Next we have Azir, whose W will now have a longer cooldown at early levels and their AP scaling has been reduced. In addition, his E is getting a significantly longer cooldown. Following this we have Nami. Her E will now only apply one stack of Electrocute. Next we have Renekton with his Q losing flat damage. This is a solid nerf, but they do give him AD scaling to reward the more aggressive crocodiles. Following this we have another nerf to Sivir. Her AD scaling is being reduced and the damage on her W is being reduced by a good amount. Next we have Sylas, who's losing 20 base health and his Q will now have a longer cooldown. Following this we have Taric, who is losing 4 base magic resist and his stun will have a 1 second longer cooldown at all levels. Next we have Trundle, who's getting a significant nerf with his W getting a 3 second longer cooldown at all ranks. And the final nerf goes to Wukong, who's losing a heavy chunk of attack speed and actually having his base movement speed turned down. For buffs, the first one goes to Camille. Her passive shield will now be 20% of her health and her hook shot is having its base damage and AD scaling significantly increased. Next we have Ezreal, who's getting a 2 second lower cooldown on his E. This will keep him safer and give him more windows to make plays at all points in the game. Following this we have Graves, who's getting a slightly longer cooldown on his Q early game but slightly less as it's leveled. As Graves usually maxes Q, this is a nice buff and the base damage of the ultimate is getting a nice chunk of extra damage. Next we have Kassadin, whose Q is getting reduced cooldown and less mana cost, allowing it to be used far more. Following this we have Nocturne, who's getting a pretty large attack speed buff and the cooldown of his passive is going from 14 to 13 seconds. Next Rel is finally getting some love with her dismounted movement speed being significantly increased. Also her E will now have a significantly lower cooldown early game and even though it's slightly longer when fully leveled, this is a solid buff. Following this we have Set, who's getting more AD scaling on his W and his E will now apply a 70% slow. Next we have Twisted Fate, who's getting a higher AP ratio on his Q and the mana cost of his W is being significantly reduced. The final buff goes to Miss Fortune, who's getting increased base damage on her Q and the cast time will now match her basic attacks. Also her W is cheaper and gives her more attack speed. However, E will now scale far worse with damage and cooldown reduction when leveled. In addition, the slow is now a flat 50% slow which will scale with AP. These changes can absolutely be seen as a buff, but it's clearly designed to kill the E build and make Q your new max. Next we have two adjustments starting with Hecarim. Firstly, his armor and HP growth is being reduced. His main change is his Q can now be stacked 3 times, where the flat damage has been reduced, the extra damage per stack and AD scaling has been increased. The W has a slightly longer cooldown early but now gives him armor and magic resist. His E now has a flat 18 second cooldown, however has less AD scaling and the knockback has been reduced. And finally, the maximum fear on his ultimate has been reduced to 1.5 seconds. Finally we have Maokai, whose healing passive will come up faster when hit by large monsters. Also his Q is getting its base damage reduced, but now deals max health damage and additional damage against monsters. His saplings have lost the max health damage, but when empowered will now do a large amount of extra damage and apply a heavier slow. Finally, his ultimate will now move a lot faster, and when it hits a champion, Maokai gets a huge chunk of movement speed. As for item changes, Stopwatch will now cost 750 gold, Guardian Angel will now cost 3000 gold, Seekers is getting buffed to give 30 AP, Zhonya's will now cost 3000 but gives an additional 15 AP and 5 ability haste. We also have new skins for Blitzcrank, Viego, Jace and Lee Sin.